Since 2016, the UK economy has performed poorly. A weak pound, high inflation, falling real wages, and a worrying decline in business investment. There are mitigating factors such as COVID and the Ukraine war, but despite this, the UK seems to be performing relatively badly compared with other countries, with one of the lowest rates of real wage growth and the IMF making dismal predictions for 2023. It raises the question, are there any economic benefits to Brexit? I'm going to examine 5 potential benefits to see how valid they are. Firstly, a strong economic benefit is being able to leave the EU Common Agricultural Policy. It takes around 38% of the EU budget and costs €58 billion, and it wastefully gives subsidies to some of the richest landowners in the country. It works by setting minimum prices, with the EU agreeing to buy any surplus. It also requires high import tariffs of between 4 to 40%, which damages the EU's ability to negotiate free trade deals and means more expensive food for us. The OECD suggested in the past it led to European family of 4 paying more than $1,000 a year in higher food prices and taxes. Now, the EU has tried to reform CAP and replace minimum prices with direct income support for landowners. But this has encouraged the destruction of wildlife habitats to become eligible for farm subsidies. The Economist reports that agricultural intensification led to more biodiversity loss in Britain than global warming or urbanisation combined. Direct income support is related to the amount of land a farmer owns. It has rewarded wealthy landowners. Recipients of the EU subsidies in the past include the Queen, Sir James Dyson, Paul Dacre, owner of the Daily Mail, and foreign landowners such as Prince Khalid bin Abdullah Al Saud. We cap benefit payments to the poorest, but with EU subsidies, the wealthier you were, often the more you got. Also, the payment per land encouraged land speculation, with wealthy buyers buying up farmland even with no particular interest in farming. According to Savills, the price of farmland rose from £4,500 per hectare in 2003 to about £16,500 in 2020. This is bigger than the price rise for UK houses, which is saying something. And of course, CAP also disadvantaged the UK because of our relatively small farm industry compared to France, Spain and Germany. Outside the CAP, the government have the opportunity to use taxpayer funds more fairly and target directly towards environmental and social goals. For example, the Sustainable Farming Initiative, which rewards farmers protecting the environment. However, after Liz Truss briefly threatened to cancel the scheme, farmers are complaining they have seen very little of a new form of subsidies. So far, only 10 million or 0.4% out of a £2.4 billion budget has been spent. And British farmers are also worried about the loss of access to the single market, being overwhelmed with cheap imports from Australia and New Zealand, and not replacing the old subsidies. In 2020, the UK made a net contribution to the EU of around 12 billion, with 38% going towards the largely inefficient Common Agricultural Policy. Leaving the EU does give a chance for a more efficient use of funds. Nothing like the £350 million a week claim for the NHS, but at least an agricultural policy that doesn't reward rich landowners. The next claimed benefit of Brexit is the argument that free movement of labour encouraged firms to rely on a low-wage economy. Now, with Brexit contributing to labour shortages, it is argued that wages will rise and firms will invest in boosting labour productivity. For example, farmers used to rely on cheap labour from Eastern Europe to collect crops. But with this supply greatly reduced, it now becomes more economic for farmers to invest in the automatic robotic collection of food, and this kind of investment would increase productivity and real wages in the long term. Now, there are a number of issues with this. Firstly, net migration has not fallen post-Brexit. EU migration did decline, but has been offset by a rise in non-EU migration. Secondly, the biggest labour shortages are in areas like care assistants, nurses, hospitality and construction, and these are jobs which cannot be easily substituted for capital. And thirdly, despite this promise of investment, we are seeing historically low levels of investment since Brexit, and this is primarily due to lack of demand, uncertainty and weak growth. Finally, it is debatable whether high migration levels do actually lead to lower real wages. For example, net migration in the 90s and 2000s led to rising real wages. Post-2009, real wage growth declined, but this wasn't so much net migration, but underlying issues in the UK economy. Now, it is possible over time there will be a resurgence in capital investment, and post-Brexit Britain will see rising labour productivity. But at the moment, there's really no evidence to see that yet. A third possible benefit of Brexit is that without the decline in EU migration, there might have been an even bigger increase in demand for rental properties. Rental prices are going through the roof, especially in places like London, because of a shortage of supply. High levels of migration post-2000 did contribute to rising house prices, squeezing living standards, especially for the young. If the UK is unwilling to build enough housing, then you might need to look at restricting migration growth. Of course, a different solution would be to tackle the housing crisis directly. A fourth possible benefit of Brexit is touted as free trade deals with non-EU countries. A government press release claims that a recent deal with Australia will increase trade by 53%, boost the UK economy by 2.3 billion and add 900 million to household wages. However, this is somewhat misleading, as they mean over the next 15 years. In the best case scenario, it means a 0.08% increase in GDP by 2035. Not quite statistically insignificant, but only a small fraction of the impact of our trade with the EU, our biggest and nearest trading partner. Former Cabinet member George Eustace criticised the deal for giving away too much in a rush to get a deal and damaging the interests of UK farmers. Of course, a deal with America would have much greater potential, but at the moment it's not on the horizon. A fifth potential benefit of Brexit could come from deregulation. In fact, some argue that until we remove all EU legislation, we haven't really done Brexit. Now, in theory, deregulation and lower taxes could attract investment and boost competitiveness, although it is worth bearing in mind Ireland already has a very low corporation tax as an EU member. Secondly, whilst in theory deregulation could reduce costs, it is not particularly a priority for business. The British Chambers of Commerce report a majority of firms do not prioritise deregulation and are more concerned about weak demand. Removing deregulation has both pros and cons, with the EU likely to retaliate against a perceived threat to its single market with higher tariffs and more checks, not to say nothing of the potential environmental and health issues of removing regulation. Anyway, these are the 5 potential benefits of Brexit, and of the 5, leaving the Common Agriculture Policy has the strongest case for a long-term benefit. However, at the moment, if we put them in context against the increased trade frictions and decline in investment, they are relatively minor and more of a silver lining on a fairly dark cloud. Of course, there is much more to Brexit than economics, but if you think I've missed any economic benefit, feel free to leave a comment. And if interested, this video looks in more detail at the costs of Brexit.